Speaker extraordinaire.
Thank you very much. So I had the same quandary as I had at B-Sides Detroit, where I have a drink, I have slides, and a microphone. Unfortunately, 2 hands, so we'll just keep swapping. So I just put this in. So MISEC, if you're in the Michigan InfoSec community, if you want to come on Freenode, we hang out on IRC and have a really good time on there. We also have a LinkedIn group newly created, and just Google for MISEC, you'll find it. And then September 22nd is the next meeting. It's in Royal Oak, so if you're on the east side of the state or would like to drive to the east side of the state, LinkedIn group or MISEC will get you the details for that. So Marsh Ray was kind enough, if you guys don't know Marsh Ray, you probably should. He was kind enough to put this quote on full disclosure like a week before I built the slide deck. And I think it's one of the best quotes I've ever seen about InfoSec. So he went, "Thank goodness the working exploit will remain as the gold standard for cutting through the security bullshit in the field of data security for foreseeable future." And I mean, with all the certifications we have, with all the things that we go through as industry people, and I mean me too, that we have to prove ourselves for certain constraints for, you know, you're a certified ethical hacker, not just you're a good guy because you have ethical in the name of your cert. You know, it's nice to see Marsh Ray really just kind of solidifying that into a quote that we can kind of stand by. So right now, I just switched jobs actually. I'm now a senior consultant, and I promise I'm not as douchey as the senior consultant sounds at Networks Group. And then boredom, which I don't have much time to be bored right now, but I hope to come 2012, is just finding web app vulnerabilities. So spare time kind of stuff, not work related, just, you know, crashing through SourceForge and seeing what's out there. And then my sad note is I've actually been a PHP programmer for 10 years, but I am quickly learning Ruby and finding a lot of fun in that. So that's kind of a consensus of what this is all about. It's kind of my side job stuff, it's my personal research stuff, and kind of a collection of those experiences. All right, so this is dangerous at any InfoSec conference, but I'm actually going to go over what things get owned for PHP. And if you have a ball, you can throw it now, but I promise we'll get somewhere fun. So the inputs that get owned, I'll just pop these up here now. So you have your get, your query strings. Those are all the things in the URL that you pass some kind of parameter, key value parameter type of things. The post is all the form submission. You have some input type, a user, in this case, for the name or the ID of the input. And then the cookies are obviously the browser side, what you're passing back to whomever, whatever website set that cookie on your browser. Hopefully it was a website. So the common attacks that we work with, local file inclusion, it's the, hey, we have access to some input you never wanted us to have access to, we're gonna grab a file off your web server that you probably wouldn't want us to have. Now Etsy password is the de facto. Honestly, no one really gives a shit about Etsy password these days, or maybe never did, if you didn't have pwconf on your system. The SQL injection is the new hotness, or at least pretends to be in the media these days. Can everyone hear me okay on this? That sounds kind of weird. So the SQL injection is everything that, I mean, any lolsec thing you've read about, any common thing in the last, 4 months, all the June stuff we went through in InfoSec community, all the media requests some of you guys probably had to field for people wanting to do interviews, has probably been about some kind of SQL injection. And then the authorization authentication bypass is my favorite, just because you skip all the semantics, you skip all the bullshit, you just get right to logging into a site that you never had a username or a password for. It's a lot more fun that way. And we're going to go over a couple of these during the presentation, but the reality is a lot of InfoSec people, you might be in the networking side, you might be in the policy side. So, you know, some of this might be precursor stuff for a lot of you that you're tired of hearing, but for some in the audience, maybe this is useful info. So we'll cover a bunch of this and see what happens. So the basis of this talk and how it's kind of laid out is there's a couple sides to everyone's career. There's the, you know, I do this for a job, I have to do this because that's what I get paid to do. Then there's the, I do this on my spare time because it's an interest. And then there's the stuff that you just happen to see. You go to a website, you log in, and you go, oh man, there's SQL injection in that, I just know there is. Or there's this form that you fill out that you go, you know, those parameters, you know, I can affect those. So there's kind of these 3 different areas of my life, and These things just kind of happen even if you aren't looking for them to. In this case, this was me looking for something because until recently I was a senior Linux engineer for a company. And a lot of our deployments, something people don't think about InfoSec is that, you know, even if your job title isn't senior InfoSec analyst or pen tester or this or that, you know, InfoSec really should be the responsibility of everyone in a given IT profession for their angle. So in my situation, we were going to host a PHP website for this financial company. It was going to be a Forex-based trading type site. You'd get your financials, be able to do trades, get your statistics for your, you know, whatever you're doing. Kind of sensitive data, right? So we had a launch date, and I looked at the website just kind of in passing because I was making sure that, you know, Apache was running, all that kind of stuff you do. When I went there, it's just one of those websites that you look at and it just screams at you, I'm vulnerable. So upon further review of the code base based on just saying, hey client, would you like a free quick audit to make sure everything's copacetic? You know, if you have a client that's at all sensible, they go, free, sure, yeah, let's do that. I mean, it was probably minutes into it that I just knew that we were in trouble and that launch date wasn't going to get hit anymore. So unfortunately, the developer is just way beyond the phrase incompetent, like to the point of kind of scary. There's a quick anecdote, and I told this at a presentation I gave at InfoGuard this week, but you know, I started doing PHP development the same way a lot of people did, which is you go online, you look for a tutorial, and it's like, oh, make a recipe book. The problem is, in programming, the recipe book mentality doesn't leave certain people. They keep programming applications as if they're all recipe books with no private information, with no authentication mechanism needed. It's like, it just doesn't occur to them that maybe you start learning one way, but you have to progress your skill set to meet up to the expectations of the industry you're working in. In this case, this is a good example of when someone doesn't do that. So vulnerabilities found, and really most of these were found in the, really in like the first 5 to 10 minutes. So you can adjust membership level, so that maybe that's like an incentive to buy a higher membership. Not a big deal, but a nice exploit. There was actually a hard-coded default password in the code. And if you hit a certain URL, which I think I have a slide for that, it would set every single user's password to one password. Sometimes you talk about, like, in maybe more of a literary context, like, oh, the backdoor in that system. This was literally a backdoor in the system. He actually made a backdoor to set passwords to one value. It's kind of unheard of from what I've dealt with anyways. You can change any password to any value you want. So pick the admin account, change their password, log in as admin. Delete all user accounts if you're feeling especially bored that day. The ACH, Automated Clearinghouse, so if you ever have to do transactions online, it's probably going to be through ACH. You give bank account info, you do a transaction, it runs it through whatever bank. Just take all their account details at one whole shot, get all the usernames, passwords, mailing addresses, anything you can think about a user. But the showstopper, and why this is all relevant top to bottom until this one, is you can just create an administrative account for yourself. You don't have to do anything like backdooring X, Y, and Z or doing SQL injection. You can actually make a password you know of for an account with administrative privilege for that system. It takes away from all the other ones a little bit. So clown shoes. Clown shoes was a term I heard a couple years ago at another IT job. And there's actually Urban Dictionary, so I cited my source. Something or someone that is a total joke. And this is clown shoes top to bottom, right? So, really, some of this conference and some of the other places I presented, a little bit of is about the technical aspect, right? Not just a funny story. So, if you look at the top part, there's the snippet of code you have. If you look at the middle part, the thing about this and the thing about some stuff people are doing lately is they treat every URL as if somehow it has some kind of intrinsic protection from replay attacks or sniffing or this or that. That URL, if you typed in that literal URL to that web application, that I've kind of obscured obviously, it would just run that as the function you see above and execute what you see. There's no authorization. There's nothing to prevent you from just opening up wget or curl or anything else and just running that URL and doing what you want to do. So in this case, there's no authentication. There's no audit trail either, which is one of those weird ones, like a secondary thing to having shitty code to begin with, but there's no way to know that someone created an audit account from X IP at Y time. You just know, oh hey, there's a new account, great. And then clearly, and this is the big takeaway too, that in any situation with SQL injection or a lot of like LFI or otherwise, no one's sanitizing, no one's escaping, no one's doing any kind of placeholder parameterized SQL queries. It's just straight data input, and what you get is what you get. So a lot of failures in this example. Here's another one for you to chew on for bad code. This one's going to be a straight SQL injection where if you see the where reset key equals reset key, there's no escaping sanitization. What I like about this, though, is if you notice for the MD5 string, they actually do a DB escape, which is a legitimate function they've built in to do sanitization of that string in some way. So why did they not do it on the reset key? This is the kind of code you look at and you go, oh, well, they're doing best practices, they're escaping strings, and then you see a second parameter that maybe they added the reset key later. Maybe they thought the reset key would never be attacked. It's always those things that the programmer just has like this disconnect from InfoSec. What would the attacker do? What would the hacker do? And it's just one of those things that I guess fell through the cracks for them. So the exploit then is you just set all keys to whatever value you want. In that case, pass1 would be your actual password. So every single user's account is now a test. Okay. Again, SQL injection doesn't sanitize all the data, yada yada yada. And the third one for this is the I don't know if any of them are better or worse, but as far as the code goes. But in this case, you can actually just make your administrative user. So you pass to this module admin users. You add a password of test, an email of a@b.com. There's no password. There's not even like an email confirmation. You just put whatever arbitrary data you want in. You go back to the login form, and now you're a@b.com with the password test. It doesn't matter. So in this case, another example of just terrible code, terrible execution. What's interesting about this one, and why I thought this wasn't vulnerable at first, is if you look at the top, it looks very scary and secure. They're doing an is super user function. They're seeing, oh, are you an administrative user? Are you allowed to do these things? What turns out, if you go through the rest of the code, that whole function at the top is just setting this client ID variable. That client ID variable has no bearing on whether or not you can execute this function, no bearing on whether or not you can create an admin user. It's actually just to put the were they an admin, basically, into the database table at the time of rendering that user. As the attacker, I really don't care what they think of me. I have the account. Nothing else really matters at that point. So it's one of those things that you just stare at it and you go, why would you do it this way? Why do you think that makes sense? Why do you think this is going to protect anything? And then no audit trail, so you can make admin accounts without ever knowing who added the account in the first place. So the remediation of this, and this is for a client again, and it's a client that had a firm launch date. They've been putting way too long amount of time probably in developing this product that's just buggy as all hell. So, protecting their ego a little bit in the process is kind of a good idea. Because you want them to be a client, but you can't, in good conscience, let people subscribe to this website that they're going to have their financial details on. It's, kind of a question of ethics at that point, or just, general logic. So, in this case, they actually did fire the developer. The person who they hired and fixed it, they fixed it, like changing things to, is this an integer, is this, So it was kind of half-assed, but they got it fixed ultimately. Now, what's scary about this, and the caveat I don't have in here, is that about a month later, they contacted us, and they said, well, we have this thing about the credit card portion that's not quite working, and we'd like to get it fixed. So I said, well, I have a lot of good PHP programmer friends. They'd be able to knock that out for you in an afternoon, no big deal. And he says, no, we're going to hire the guy we just fired. So I'm sitting around going like, this is over email, I'm like sitting, so you are going to hire back someone you just fired. So they have like a vendetta, they're already pissed off. But you're going to let them work on the portion of the code that handles credit card management. And it's one of those things like, you're like, if there was a perfect storm, and it was in IT, what would it look like? And this seems like it might be apropos to fill that gap. So that was kind of scary. And the fun fact, and this is still true as far as I know, based on the last time I checked, the code base of this CMS, if we can call it that, is actually used not only by the developer himself, which his website's vulnerable, but it's used by about 30 other sites, a lot of nonprofits, sites related to like weird things like opera houses and important things like donation sites for different medical disease fundraisers. So there's a lot of information out there with a lot of credit cards, a lot of people's financial info, and it was all vulnerable to the same thing. Now, yes, I've made him aware of all these vulnerabilities, but at the same time, he hasn't fixed them, and it's kind of a weird stalemate that we have going in that, if I prove it to him, I'm committing a crime, but how am I supposed to get this guy prosecuted for negligence? It's an interesting situation to be in, but I'm still kind of working diligently to get some kind of resolution from him. I've actually, frankly, never dealt with anyone but this guy in his position where he wouldn't fix things knowing that they're impeding people's personal lives. Like, you could get this data stolen, it wouldn't matter. So, sir?
You have mentioned parameterized queries and data best practice coding techniques, and one of them. Also, the last is called SQL injection, detection utility, SQL management.
Yeah, so it's... Oh, SQL map will definitely work on PHP. But that's another couple stories. But the takeaway here is I've told him vulnerabilities exist, and he knows they exist. His thing, however, is unless you are going to get me in trouble with someone, it doesn't matter to me because I've already got paid. And if anyone wants to take a pot shot at this guy, let me know. As far as legally, but as far as my interaction with him, telling him he fully knows he's vulnerable. At that point,
in your audit report, the
management for his company that he owns. Yeah, exactly. This is as mom and pop as it gets. It's him and like a secretary who's his wife, and there's no upper management. There's no like sub guys. There's just him and his wife. That's the company. But I digress for now. But we can talk later if you guys want to chat about that. So this is kind of a good time to segue because we're going to start talking about open source software. So that's like the work angle. That's the, hey, I'm doing something, I'm getting paid for it. This is the every other day, I'm sitting on my couch, let's go to Fresh Meat and see what's up. And if anyone's ever been there, Fresh Meat is actually a software site, not a porn site. So CVEs, this is one of those things that you'd think I would have known a long time ago, but it stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. MITRE is the organization who actually kind of operates the CVEs, takes in the request to make a CVE. And CVEs are just kind of a unique identifier for all these software package vulnerabilities, so that if you go, this company has this vulnerability, I can quickly map back as a Linux engineer and say, oh, this version of OpenSSH isn't vulnerable to that, or yada yada. Within the fact that MITRE gives you, responsible disclosure is supposed to be an aspect of that, so you shouldn't be the guy in full disclosure who's going, I just popped this website, they're running this version of WordPress, here's my exploit, go own them. That's not really what CVE is for. It's the, I email WordPress and say, I found a vulnerability in version 3 whatever, I'm planning on releasing a disclosure in 2 weeks. Is there something that you can get out before then, or do you need me to push my release date back? So it's that responsible disclosure. It's still disclosure because you're saying, hey, there's a problem, you're not just hiding it. But you're working with the vendor to get a patch set out first before you put people in kind of in danger of that situation. And something I ran into personally that I really didn't think of before was that when I've released vulnerabilities, sometimes people have found them already, and they've released them to the vendor already, but never released them publicly. So by having a CVE, you can kind of make that unique mapping between a problem and a vendor product or whatever. So it makes it a lot easier to do disclosure when there's that kind of tracking. And that's kind of the second point there. So to get a CVE, and whether or not you want to go this route, just some good info if you ever have to, you have to find a vulnerability, so that's positive, at least for you. The next part is you should probably talk to the vendor to say, is this vulnerability? Because no one's perfect, and sometimes you have a set of scope you do some kind of vulnerability assessment of this application. Turns out you did it in a flawed way. Turns out you did it in a way that went against their install doc. Turns out you did. There's a lot of separate things that you could have done wrong that might actually make it not a vulnerability worth releasing publicly or even fixing for that matter. So talk to them first and see what's up. Once you actually confirm, yeah, this is a vuln, we're going to fix it, you can talk to a CNA, which is basically just a person who's going to give you a number. Steve at MITRE is the guy I always talk to. You can post a bug tracker, FD, or whoever you want, and they'll usually find a contact on there and get you a CVE put out. And I do mean ideally for this case. Ideally, the vendor cares and fixes the issue. We'll talk about an issue or a situation where that isn't the case. Release your advisory. So the CVE should be included in every docu release, every post to bug track, every post to full disclosure, every post to your personal blog, because it helps actually index. When MITRE goes back and actually looks for these links, it'll actually index it with your CVE where these things were released at. And then you can also help them out by providing links directly back to them. That'll make it easier for them to kind of post this data all in one place. So that's the warm-up lesson about CVEs and how it relates to this next part. You know, PHP apps, as long as I've been a developer, it's one of those things that if you start coding a language, if you're a security person, you start looking, how do I secure that language? And if you're everyone else, you make recipe books for the rest of your life. So on SourceForge or Fresh Meat, on any given day, even projects that have been around for 3, 4, 5 years, if you look, my average, honestly, and I've actually documented this for some sick reason, 1 in 20 PHP apps I found a vuln in. So if you're really bored and you want to do some, InfoSec research or something to spend some time, just look for some PHP apps. CMSs are beautiful because other than the big 3, usually it's pretty easy to find one that has some kind of vuln in it. Oh, look, I got a text. Oh, that didn't come up. That's sad. So not everyone releasing software, turns out, is actually good at doing it. Sometimes we have like this misconception in the open source community that if someone releases an app, they're qualified to do so. Even if it works well for your purpose, that doesn't mean that they're actually a qualified developer to release code. It just means they've released code and you've downloaded and installed it for some reason. So even projects, and the first example I think is going to be a good example of that. Anyone ever use WSN links or any of the WSN products? Okay. So WSN's been around for a while. They have like forums, they have like link aggregators, all these kinds of different products, and they've been around for, I don't know, 6, 7 years probably. It's one of those things that you go, well, there couldn't possibly be, or we've gotten past the point of SQL injection, or we are sure that this isn't an issue anymore. And then you actually look at a website and you go, oh, hey, there's SQL injection. So in this condition, it's a little bit more of a complex as far as SQL injection goes, because some of them are just ridiculously simple. What was funny about this one is I didn't realize, because WSN is a paid product, they had a trial. So I was actually doing all of this blind, and it took me a lot longer than it probably should have if I had just downloaded the trial, looked at the source code, and figured out where these vulns were. But I did it all blind, which is best effort for me. But in this case, you actually had to take 2 different parameters and kind of stack them together just because of how the SQL sequence flowed. And if you link the 2 together, you could do something like make a PHP shell exec as a web page on the system in some temp space or in a web directory. In this case, they just did a shitty job at sanitizing data inputs. A lot of the areas of WSN products, they actually do escape things, do SQL injection protection type stuff like that. But in this case, they didn't. In the recommendations for the installation of this product, and one thing I think that's really either lacking from developers is that a lot of times the developer is also the DBA, is also the sysadmin. Now, if you're good at writing PHP code, that might not mean that you understand the intricacies of SQL products. In this case, there's no best practices. For this set of data, it really shouldn't have had any kind of file exportation at a SQL level. There's a bunch of things you can do with SQL that people don't know about. One of them is you can write and read files from SQL. And in this case, there's no reason why the search function that's hitting data on the database should be able to write files out with that privilege set. And then one other fun thing I found out, by default, you can actually just pass debug equals 1, it will dump all of its guts about what the SQL query is doing at any given time. So to write injections is so much simpler when they tell you exactly where your flaws are. There's no blind SQL injection. There's no, counting the seconds before this millisecond response comes back with SQL. You can literally see what the query is you're running. So pretty easy once you get into it. That was my first CVE, which wasn't all that long ago, frankly. Their fix wasn't to fix SQL injection by doing parameterized queries, placeholder queries. It wasn't to limit scope or escape data. They actually just blacklisted the union word, or the piece of statement, union, as far as what a query could contain. Now, MySQL versus like MS SQL, there's some subtleties there as far as how SQL injection usually works and what you can exploit. In this case, yeah, it probably fixed the issue, but it's a terrible way to fix it. 3 days after release, or after notification, a new version was released, which is pretty good in open source time. And really, he should have actually fixed the underlying SQL injection properties rather than just kind of half-assing it with a union blacklist. Pointer, I need to drink more from these guys. So Pointer, they're a friendly company from overseas, and this is one of those applications that I downloaded once. I looked at the code and I went, yeah, it looks okay. They protect against SQL injection, they protect against local file inclusion, they escape strings, all that good stuff. I actually deleted the code base and then I just happened to download it again. It's like, all right, I'll take another look. Anyone want to yell out what's wrong with this above? Now think of this in a context of, if this isn't true, you actually get an administrative page, or you get the rest of the page. So this is kind of the cock block of the web page. So what here is wrong if everything else below it, if that isn't true, is a security issue? I'll wait. So what about the A-user portion? Trusting the cookies. So, as you guys hopefully know or will know after this presentation, cookies are browser-based, right? I can make a cookie on my browser at any given time. It's a local file system to me, the client. What they did is, if there's a cookie called A-user, or I should say and in this case, and there's a cookie called A-pass, even if those don't have any data inside them, even if I, the end user, made them, it's okay. And what this function, or what this conditional makes is, this is actually the conditional that prevents you from being an admin on the website. Because everything after this if statement, if you don't fail that if statement, will make you an admin privilege. So I just went into Firebug, or FireCookie, or whatever it is at that point, created 2 cookies, A-user and A-pass. You could do it with curl if you wanted, just on command line. And by making those cookies with no data inside them, I'm now an admin in this CMS. So that goes towards the authentication bypass, which again is just the most fun thing ever, because you're not brute forcing, rainbow tabling, stupid things. You're just logging in without anyone telling you otherwise. So that's kind of a verbal or a written way of saying what I just said. But first off, anyone that would actually store a password in a cookie is mental. There's no reason to. There's no benefit to storing cookies or passwords in cookies. PHP actually has very good session support. You make a session. Once that session goes away, user privilege goes away. It's pretty straightforward. If there was a session cookie, and there probably should have been here, it should be unique. It should be encrypted. Replay text shouldn't work. All those kinds of bad things shouldn't happen. And then blank cookies, of all things, should never be used as a form of authentication. It's insane. So it's one of those things that you see these best practices like SQL injection protection, LFI protection, and then they forget to check that there's actually data in these cookies. I don't know. So there were 2 CVs. There were actually 2 different products that this applied to. Now this slide deck's from like February. I'm sure they've had a new version. Who knows if they've actually fixed this, and you'll see why in a second. So they came up with legal threats against me for this. And in this case, the vendor claimed that the user should rename their admin folder to prevent the issue. Now, I like actually security through obscurity. I think it's a part of the process of information security. If you want to put your SSH on a different port than 22, so be it. Now, it shouldn't be your only step. However, in this case, this is their only step. They want you to rename the folder to prevent people from brute forcing. Or I guess in that case they would have to brute force, but to prevent this vulnerability, which is simply fixed by making a session rather than reading cookies, they didn't bother with that because it's easier. So this company is Swiss, and you would think, man, the Swiss, those guys are nice. We've got good relations with the Swiss, they're friendly, they have a lot of snow, all kinds of preconceived notions. Turns out they're not. These are all email outtakes from this conversation, and I just love these more than life itself. And this is all, put sick anywhere you see bad grammar, because this is all they said. We do not understand why you try to manipulate the softwares. I am sure that you are aware that it is legal to do so. Now is a good time to mention that this is released under, not GPL, not whatever. This is released under Creative Commons. And they're telling me that modifying software is illegal, which is a whole new level of impressive. It is not your duty to publish anything related about our software as long as we ask for it. So they think they can put a ball gag in your mouth in the case of it makes them look bad, okay? And what you are trying to do is to find a security hole and publish it so that everyone can hack a system. This is the illegal part, so be aware of this. I appreciate them giving me my legal rights from, another country that has no applicability to ours, but, it's nice of them. The illegal thing is to publish the security gap to show other people the way how to attack. That is the same as telling someone how to build a bomb. So I think the only thing consistent between this speech the last 3 times I gave it was, how the fuck do you compare a CMS exploit and something no one has ever used, or probably won't except for me, to building a bomb? There's a certain level of bravado there that you're willing to say that your product is so important to the world that building a bomb and telling you how to exploit that CMS is going to just ruin everyone's lives. It's going to kill people, it's going to maim people, it's a horrible thing. Sir?
They didn't ask for 6 months or anything? They just blasted it?
Oh no, they just kicked me in the face right away, don't worry. And and I usually preface this, so I'll give you my preface now. This is the reason, if you are in InfoSec, if you're a tier 1 tech support guy, or you're a senior sysadmin or network engineer, this is the reason why we should be in InfoSec. Of course, it could be made safer, and we know how to do it. But we have designed the softwares so that renaming admin folder gives us less work. This kind of apathy is just, it's infuriating, it's just mind-numbing, but it gives us a purpose beyond what we even thought we were making a lot of money for, which is protecting everyone else from assholes like this. Alright, so that's my story about them. Here's a quick primer, and it's primer by the way, not primer, it's not what you put on the wall. The quick primer of that PHP is actually built and compiled in C. Now what's important about that is that C has its own set of vulnerabilities beyond PHP's terribleness. And null byte attacks, if any of you guys were old CGI coders or doing your thing back when, the null byte attack is it's classic. So what's fun is that when you do certain things like file system calls, P will actually read a null byte as end of string. Okay, why is that important? Anyone PHP programmer? Fucking elitists. All right. I only do ASM. So this statement, as it seems completely obvious, that get parameter is actually in the URL. So google.com/file.php file equals blah. It could be a JPEG, it could be whatever file you want to include. So all this does is take that file and includes it into the input or renders the source or whatever have you. So what a lot of people do is, so that they don't get local file inclusion, they'll actually append the suffix to that file name that they're expecting. So if you have a photo album and you have all JPEGs, you're probably going to append .jpg. And so if someone puts in /etc/password, it's going to append .jpg, and that's not a real file, right? So that's a safe way to obscure rather than just doing I don't know, file sanitization. So you might do an attack like that. I'm sure some of you have done an attack like that, and it probably worked. What it does on the back end, though, is it does that, which just recurses back through the path and includes Etsy password. You get, the usernames of all the people in the system, and you go, oh, I pwned you, and that's about that. What a real attacker is probably going to do is they're probably going to throw a null byte in that, and the null byte's going to make this happen. So the null byte's going to stop rendering because PHP is C-based, and it's going to render up to a null byte. And they're actually going to include Etsy password. No one would do this. Oh. So Paul CMS, just another run-of-the-mill CMS. They take in a parameter, they call it page. I run that, and I get Etsy password rather than them obscuring me with that .php extension. A couple things here, and there's always caveats to anything you do with InfoSec. Magic quotes GPC is probably one of the most evil things in PHP because it automatically escapes anything that could be escaped. Quotes, for any input, get, post, cookies, whatever, which is why GPC. So what happens though is most people don't run it with that. That's not the default these days. In this case, they're taking a direct request, and if you see request is basically a mixture between get and post. It takes any input in from either of those and calls a request. In this case, you're going to get it. It's going to hit the null byte attack for C, and I'm going to get your Etsy password or bash RC or bash history or whatever I want back from you. Another CVE. The vendor patch, it came out immediately, but he didn't increment the number. He didn't increment the version. So I'm okay with people writing shitty code. I'm not okay with people trying to pass it off as if that never happened. So I emailed him back nicely and I said, oh, hey, I saw you, you released your patch, but it's the same version number. How are people supposed to know the difference or know that there was a problem? He's like, oh, yeah, sorry, yeah, okay. So, nice enough guy and very responsive, but he was trying to slip it under the rug, like, oh, this never happened. Let's pretend, bad things don't, happen to my code base. Again, the InfoGuard talk I gave was about there are no really good web programming education. There's no program out there for a bachelor's in web application development that I know of. Null byte attacks. Who's going to think of attacking C with a PHP like web page? Most people wouldn't, if they're just in college, right? And the reality is most people aren't thinking of those things, and then we come into the picture and we ruin everyone's day. But it's something to actually consider. If they had just, done a regex like, oh, it should only look like this, or sanitize, oh, we're going to escape these parameters, this wouldn't be a problem still. Oh man, we're ahead of schedule. So the last one here, this is tail 3. Now, as any good geek should do, and I haven't done probably in a couple of years, unfortunately, as you can probably see, you sign up for a gem membership, and that's it, right? You're just a good, fit geek, and you're going to sign up for a gym membership. However, your gym's online fitness integration, it actually has broken single sign-on. And that single sign-on is actually going to be leaking out your personal information and personal health information. That's not fun. But, and this is the part where I have to really caveat the hell out of this talk, and you'll see a little bit later in the slides, but I really don't believe InfoSec is about like the best exploit. I don't believe it's about finding the coolest vulnerability. I don't believe it's about finding the best, way to present your details to wow the world. It's about information security. If you're protecting information, you're doing information security. And this is why. So I don't have access to this because it's software as a service, right? I have to imagine somewhere in their code base it looks a little bit like this. If you pass, and this might take you guys back to some Citibank stuff recently of this year, if you pass any integer, and that integer links to a real person's account, it will give you the entire detail set of that person. It will log you in as if you are that person. There's no authentication, there's no authorization, there's no single sign-on token, there's no anything that you can imagine in the InfoSec world. You just become that person. So it sucks because they just completely skipped over the whole single sign-on thing. I logged into my gym, but this third-party integration site, there's a complete disconnect between them and me. And I've worked for companies that do software engineering. I've worked for companies that I've done security audits for. There is no way anyone could have ever tested or QA'd this. It's just, it's one of those things that you stare at. And this is not the last time I ever saw this. There's actually a very major organization, which I'm not allowed to release at this time, that did the same thing with literal presidential candidates with their information, including the last 4 of their social security number published. So what I did, if you've ever made that curl script in Bash, you just take n number of rotations of that, start at some number, and of 10,000 IDs, I just arbitrarily sequenced 2,700 accounts of the 10,000 existed in activated or unactivated state. So you're thinking unactivated, that doesn't sound important. We'll get to that in a second. Of 1,000, so this was the second script I decided to do more generically, of 1,000 member ID values, 76 were activated. Of those, 1 had a picture, 8 had a phone number, and at least 1 had a medical questionnaire filled out, including things like, I recently was pregnant, I have diabetes. If anyone in here is in the medical field, HIPAA's just punching you in the face right now and making you sad. Unactivated account. So what unactivated account means, and this was me, you've signed up for a gym membership. You've never signed up to this other third-party integration site. You've never checked that consent box. You've never done anything. They already have your information. They already have your first name, last name, date of birth, gender, and email address. You've never consented to any of this. The reason I know that is because when I went to the sign-up form, if you click, oh, I would like to maybe sign up or something, and before you get to the terms of service, all that kind of SLA stuff, if you look in the form, your information's pre-populated in there, okay? An activated account, however. Photo, first name, last name, date of birth, gender, email address, phone number, height, weight, body fat percentage, time zone, gym membership, company, workout schedule, medical history, including blood pressure issues, heart problems, recent surgery, pregnancy, diabetes, and other things. So if you're, I don't know, a stalker, and you find someone's photo, and their full name, and their phone number, and which gym company they're with, you find out their workout schedule. They literally ask you, 9 to 5, when do you work out? Now I'm the creepy guy that's in the parking lot waiting for you to finish. I know what your face looks like, and I'm going to attack you. Now that may be a worst case scenario, but is it really up to this company to determine whether or not you're in that worst case scenario? One of the interesting things, and I did a quick just like grep regex situation of, I didn't look at people's personal info because I really don't want to know that stuff. I looked for email extensions, right? There were people with government agencies, there were people that were with Oracle proper, there were people with a lot of big companies that, who knows, maybe they're on a board somewhere, and maybe the public doesn't know that the person on the board right now has high blood pressure. Maybe they don't know they just had an angioplasty. Maybe those are the things that come out that why HIPAA exists. It's not your information, and if it comes out, maybe it's harmful. So the company that I reported this to, it's a small company, but it has a very international reach, unfortunately. I just contacted him. I got his voicemail, literally. So I'm like, hey, I sent you an email. Would you call me back? We had emails back and forth. They all started very cordial, like, thank you for letting us know. We really appreciate it. It's important to us to protect numbers. And then as we went back and forth, all of a sudden the CC list got a lot bigger. Weird. So lawyers got added, execs got added to the list. It got kind of interesting. But what I did for myself is that I constantly reaffirmed that, listen, I'm here to help. I noticed this. I'm a member. I'm a person with my information exposed right now. I want to let you know that in my professional duty, I have to tell you these things. And it took 3 weeks. 3 weeks that everyone's info was exposed by anyone with a 4i in 1 through 1 million script could steal all this data. 3 weeks. Oh, here's my animation for the presentation. So 90,000 people, now for like the John Oberheids and Moxies of the world, that's not a big number, but you know, it's interesting to be able to affect 90,000 people's lives, their PII, PHI, in a whole shot. It's kind of, it's cool, and it's another reason why, you know, being in InfoSec is so important, because you can't control those things. And here's my whole like CYA page, or pages. Between me helping them and me committing a crime, very thin line. Probably crossed it a couple times, maybe went back, who knows. What I see a lot of people do, and this especially happens on full disclosure if you watch, people go, well, I'm going to release all this data and that'll prove it to them. And they're posting with like their Gmail account and like their home address. And don't push people into a corner, because just like an animal, they're going to fight back, and you're probably going to lose. You're the college kid hacker that's trying to help people, and they have an exec team and lawyer team that's going to put you into the ground if you do that. And remember, God bless America, I honestly mean that, but we can get sued for anything at any time by anyone. And if you're not, a $1 million executive or a company with a lot of bankroll, your life's going to be ruined whether or not you did something wrong. So just keep that in mind when you do these things. Be careful. So what I found, at least, and maybe this is just pure luck, but if you say the right thing consistently and you don't threat people and you say your purpose and you say why it's important, if they ever come back to you and they do try to threaten you, it's probably going to be a hard case to get a jury to convict a guy who's trying to do their best to help everyone out. Full disclosure, ultimately, and this is for all three of the phases, ultimately it's going to help everyone, whether it's your family, whether it's you, whether it's someone else. The responsible disclosure actually makes things a lot easier because you have a working relationship with a company. I actually had one company who, I didn't talk about at this presentation, but they said, let us know if there's other things that you find out that we can fix. Like, they were all for it to help out and make sure that they were doing the best they could within limited resource, maybe for their engineering team. And ultimately, vuln research, and this is really like low-hanging fruit vuln research. There's people that are doing obscene things compared to what this presentation's about. Ultimately, it's fun. If the first time you find an exploit that actually works, you do the proof of concept, you send it over to a vendor. It really is fun if you really are into the InfoSec thing. I'll give both these at once. I literally heard from that company I mentioned earlier where they had to stop that launch date because of that firm who just sucked at his job. And they actually told me, well, we didn't build it with security in mind. It was a Forex trading site for financial services for people that had their bank accounts in it. And they didn't build it with security in mind. So, and this is my CEH thing, so if anyone has a CEH in here, I hate to digress, but this whole idea of a certified ethical hacker is just obscene to me. It's this retarded juxtaposition of, well, you're going to be a bad thing and a good thing, and why not just be a professional? Why can't we just be certified security professionals? Why do we have to put that ethical in there? Because that should be inherent. We're not, it kind of dumbs down a lot of people's careers when you have to put ethical in it to make it mean something. But that's another battle to fight. And ultimately, like I was talking about, it's not about how awesome your exploit is. At the end of the day, we're in InfoSec to protect information. However you do that, if it's a local file inclusion, if it's SQL injection, if it's authorization bypass, or if it's an integer flip in a URL, you're doing InfoSec. And if you're protecting 90,000 people by telling them something as stupid as that, good for you. So, I don't think John's in here, he's seen this presentation once or twice, but so John Oberheid, you guys probably saw him earlier, he's just crazy smart and a lot more impressive than this talk, I'm sure. But he helped me out with the whole CVE process. He taught me, how to go about it the right way and not piss anyone off in the process. Steve Christie's over at MITRE, and again, they're the organization who actually puts through CVEs. They're the ones that do the CNA primarily. And then Todd Jarvis. Does anyone know Todd at PacketStorm or work with them ever? So Todd, PacketStorm and some of these websites have been around for a long, long time. And they collect papers, they collect exploits, they collect all kinds of good stuff. And in that process, I sent these things out to him, and he would actually send back to me like, oh, thanks so much, what a great exploit, this is cool, thank you. And I'm like, I'm not looking for praise here, I was just trying to get you to post it on your website, but thanks anyway. So, really nice guy, for what it's worth. There's my contact info. I'm sure I'm completely I'm out of time. So to get the next speaker on, if you want to talk, I've actually got to take off for some family stuff. But if you want to card really quick, just find me on one of these. And my website actually has the slide deck and a bunch of other ones. But thank you so much for your time. The people at GrrCON, it's just crazy they got this together in such a little time frame. And please, please, please thank them for all the work they put in this weekend. Thanks, guys.